You ever wonder why people always say stuff like, don't be outside at night, or don't go out there alone, especially on the REZ? It's something that you always hear, and for good reason. The REZ is different, full of spirits, bad medicine, and stuff that you can't always explain. It's also not just talk. People know to respect what's out there, because the land carries a lot of history, bad history at that. But why is it that it's only on the REZ, and not outside in the major cities? Well, for a few reasons. The REZ is full of troubled history. Many of our elders say that the negative energy, the spirits of those who died or suffer on these lands still linger. Even those who passed in tragic circumstances are considered restless or vengeful if the spirit is still lingering around. And here on the REZ, everyone and their mom has a story about someone who did something and what happened to them after. It's not just here on the Pine Ridge. You hear the same things from other reservations around too. It's almost like the land holds on to everything that's happened, good and bad. A lot of people suffer on these parts of the land, and some of those things never did leave. Breaking the rules, such as ignoring warnings or crossing spiritual lines, like whistling at night, walking alone at night, or opening doors when you hear knocking, is believed to invite danger. And you have to understand, when you're talking about the REZ, you're talking about a place where our traditions and beliefs are still alive, where if you break one of these rules, you can possibly disturb something. If you don't listen to those warnings, well, things are bound to happen. I'm sure you heard about skinwalkers, Bigfoot, water babies, the Wendigo, la lechuza, el nagual, the lizard man, la llorona, the stikini, shadow people, or possibly of how witchcraft can mess with you. All of this is tied into the land, and a lot of it has to do with indigenous history. People talk about these things because they've seen them, they lived it. On the REZ, you don't mess with that kind of stuff. By the way, when I say the land, I literally mean the land. The isolation, the woods, the hills, the mountains, they're full of things that you don't want to come across. People here know better than to whistle after dark, or answer knocks on the door when no one's supposed to be there. It's not that creepy stuff only happens here, but out here on the REZ, it just seems like that curtain, the window between us and the other side, is a bit thinner. I'm actually from the Pine Ridge REZ, home of the Oglala Lakota Nation. I am going to say this is going to be a long story. If you don't like detailed stories, well, I guess you can skip through it. But there's so much history behind everything that I'm going to share with you. You ever had one of those days when something happens, and when it does, it suddenly reminds you of something that happened years ago? Does that even make sense? The other day I was looking at an old analog radio scanner when I had a memory come rushing back to me. This actually happened on a local Catholic school ground. It's called the Red Cloud Indian School. It has kindergarten through grade 12. For those who remember the gravestone that has the devil's face on it, it's not there anymore. If you know who I'm talking about, then you might remember his last name was Edwards. Anyways, it was called Holy Rosary Mission back in the day, and many people died on that highway right next to there. If you pass by there, you know how dangerous it can be having a school next to the highway. So a lot of people died there back in the day, or I should say throughout the REZ. But anyways, the school itself had some weird things going on. This is not surprising to anyone, nor to me. It's not there anymore, but there used to be a payphone in front of the school that people would use. That payphone is part of the story that I'm going to tell you. That payphone used to be located across the school, where it used to be. Now there stands the new building that was built a few years after this happened. Back then, the tribal law enforcement was known as the Oglala Sioux Tribe Public Safety Commission. They had the responsibility to enforce tribal laws, respond to requests for medical assistance, and more. The OST Public Safety Commission had 2 dispatch centers for the REZ. One of them was located in Kyle, South Dakota, which was responsible for the eastern side of the REZ. The other center was located in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and it handled the western side of the REZ. One of the best things about working for the tribal court and tribal law enforcement agencies is the stories that you hear, or sometimes the stories you become a part of. I was a tribal prosecutor when this all happened, and maybe I'm telling my age here, but it's alright. I figure it's time to pass these stories down before my time here is up. Now, for those of you who don't know, a tribal prosecutor is like a bridge between law enforcement and the court system. My job was to handle all sorts of cases, everything from minor disputes to serious criminal matters, and I worked very close with the tribal police and dispatchers. If there was an arrest made, or if there was a situation that needed legal oversight, I would often be brought in to assess charges or give direction. That meant that I was around for a lot of what went on at the dispatch center. Even if I wasn't the one on the radio, I was always close to the action, you can say. And there were many nights when I would be in the same room with the people there, whenever something would go down. That night was one of those situations. This took place before the tribal dispatch center had audio recording. I'm saying this because I know you're wondering why I had to be there. Back then, every call came in on a landline, and dispatchers used legal pads to write down the calls. Calls to law enforcement were logged the same way, and everything was typed up at the end of the shift on a typewriter. No computers, no fancy systems, just the basics. Again, I guess I'm telling my age here. I happened to be at the office late that night, working on some paperwork for a case we were trying to get in court the next day. As I sat there, I remember hearing the line ring. It was a separate phone from the normal lines, so when that one went off, everyone knew it was serious. You could always feel a shift in the room when it rang. I was there when she answered the phone, around 3 in the morning, asking what the emergency was and what assistance they needed. On the other end of the phone was a man. He was hysterical, he was crying, and hard to understand on the phone. The dispatcher was able to calm him down a bit when he told her that he needed help because he was being chased. Someone was trying to do something to him. The man started crying again on the phone as he told him that he was walking back into Pine Ridge when he got close to a little community called Calico. He met up with another man along the road. It was dark, and he couldn't see him too well. Something about the figure didn't feel right, so he kept walking. As he continued walking, the person followed behind him. As it started following him, it started saying things to him. Apparently, he just told him randomly that he was going to take his soul. He turned around and asked him what he said, and the man repeated that was going to take his soul. He looked at him, and that's when he started running down the road. As he was running, he could hear the guy behind him just repeating that he was going to take his soul. But then, it said something different. He told him it was going to take his soul, and when it did, he was going to eat it. Apparently the voice that the guy was using was really creepy as well. The guy kept running and running, but apparently the other person kept up with him as he was running as well. From just north of there, he was coming close to the Red Cloud Indian School. He kept running as this person was right behind him. He then saw the blue security lights of Red Cloud, and he ran to the north turnoff and down into the school. He remembered there was a payphone there. He screamed over his shoulder that he was going to call the police, as he possibly thought that maybe it was someone trying to pull a prank. When he said this, the other person just laughed at him and repeated, "I'm going to take your soul and eat it." He made it to the payphone and called police. The dispatcher thought he was drunk and asked him if he was drinking. He denied being drunk and wanted the police to come now. The dispatcher was about to ask him another question when he started screaming into the phone, yelling that he was on the phone with the police and to keep away. The tone of his voice was enough for the dispatcher to dispatch a unit to Red Cloud School. The dispatcher advised the responding unit that was on its way that it was possibly an assault in progress. The dispatcher got back on the phone and tried to tell the man that the officers were on the way. He was still yelling to keep away, and he said that the officers were on the way. Then, this is where you know it was serious and true. The dispatcher heard a very deep evil sound, a voice over the man yelling. It told him that it didn't care, that he was going to kill him, take his soul, and eat it. The voice alone made the dispatcher get chills. She got back on the radio and told the officer to step it up. She advised that she could hear the man yelling and a voice in the background threatening the man on the phone. Another unit was coming south from Oglala, going towards Red Cloud School. She dispatched that unit to the same traffic. As the units were on the way to the school, she could hear the voice repeating that it was going to kill him, take his soul, and eat it. The man was hysterical, screaming to keep away, crying and yelling at the voice. Then, the voice just laughed and repeated the same thing. But then, it added, "The police won't be able to save you from what's going to happen." That's when the man started crying again, yelling into the phone to hurry up. The dispatcher advised the responding units that she could hear the other person on the phone. Both units ended up arriving at the same time. The dispatcher could hear the sirens off in the distance on the phone, and the siren got louder as the units arrived. The dispatcher could still hear the man yelling, crying, and at the same time the voice was repeating, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take your soul and eat it." That's when she heard laughing as the sirens got loud, and the units both advised that they were on scene on the radio. The dispatcher advised that she could still hear the other party on the phone threatening the man. The man was still crying and now yelling. Then she heard officers in the background as the voice said one last time, "I'm going to kill you, take your soul, and eat it." The officers' voices could be heard by the dispatcher as they came up to the man. He was crying as they came up to him. The Pine Ridge officer came on the phone and told the dispatcher that they had arrived and were going to bring him in. Relieved, the dispatcher started going through the normal questions. "Okay, can you give me a description? How drunk is he? Was he carrying a weapon or anything?" The officer's response surprised her. "No, actually, he's sober. He looks like a normal guy. No weapon on him." That didn't make sense. She assumed both of them were drinking or something. But maybe it was just the fear. She decided to move on. "Alright, and what about the victim? Can you give me his information?" There was a long pause on the other end. "What do you mean?" "The one who called us. What does he look like?" More silence. There's nobody else here but him," the officer finally said. "What do you mean, nobody else?" she pressed. "I heard the other voice myself, just before you arrived." "I'm telling you, there's no one else here," the officer repeated again. "He's the only one standing by the payphone. We checked the area. There's no sign of anyone else." The officer from Pine Ridge went on to tell her that when he turned into Red Cloud School from the south, he could see the man standing by the payphone. The man was swinging towards the air at something as he came down to the payphone. The dispatcher heard the voice, but there was no one there as the officers arrived. And that was basically it. He was sent to the psych unit for 5 days. I don't know what happened to him after he got out. People stopped talking about it, like most things around here. Things like this get spread around, and they basically become stories to scare people into following the rules. But the truth is that nobody really forgets. The dispatchers that were there, they retired not too long after that. One of them moved to Kansas to be with her kids and watch her grandkids grow up. I still see the other one here and there. We don't talk much about that night. I brought it up once when I ran into her at the grocery store, just to see if she remembered it the way I do. She went quiet for a moment, then gave me a strange look. You know, the kind of look that people give you when they want to tell you something, but they think it's better if you don't. No. She finally said, "It wasn't just him. There was something else." Then she shook her head like she was trying to shake off the memory and walked away without saying anything else. I never pressed her after that. But sometimes, late at night, like right now, as I'm up writing this down, I think about the voice on that call, the way it said it was going to take his soul, and I do wonder, did it? I mentioned earlier how people say, "Don't be outside at night," or "Don't go out there alone." It's not just made up. There are things you don't do on the REZ for good reason, whether it's something as simple as not whistling after dark, or refusing to answer a knock on the door when no one's supposed to be there. All these rules exist for a reason. If you're not from the REZ, you might laugh at stories like this, and that's fine, but you don't know what is out there. The land carries the spirits of those who never left, and sometimes, out here, those spirits or things will notice you. In some cultures, there are witches. They shift into a human, animal, something in between. There's also people who curse others. They thrive off confusion and make your life hell. They don't need to kill you to hurt you. They just need to break you down. And if you do catch their attention, they will make you question everything. The man in this experience, he may have come across one of these things. Or maybe he was cursed. Maybe a shapeshifter was after him. Or maybe it was something much more old, something darker. I'm not sure. I mean, what was he doing out at night, that late? But I do know this, the man could see it, something in the dark, and when he ran, it chased him, saying that it was going to take his soul. Maybe that was just the beginning. I know, a lot of maybes, but you get my point. If you ever do come visit us at the REZ, or somehow find yourself on the REZ, especially after dark, please, listen to the warnings. Respect the land. Respect the spirits. Don't whistle. Don't answer knocks at the door when no one should be there. And if you hear somebody or something calling your name, or if you feel something following you in the dark, ignore it. People might believe in fences or county lines, thinking that they can leave this place and be safe once they cross over to the city, you can say. However, the spirits, these things, they are not limited by territorial names and labels. They go wherever they please, and sometimes they follow you. Y'all stay safe out there. This is my cousin's property that I went to go visit, and I'm never going back. I went to go visit my cousin in the country for 3 days. He has a house with a small lake, or a large pond, or whatever you want to call it. But it's big enough to swim in, that's what matters. His property also has a decent amount of thick forest. The forest surrounds the lake, his house, and his field as well. The field has a shed that's filled with junk. It's a pretty cool place. I used to go there as a kid. Basically, I would spend every summer there until I was 12. And suddenly, we just stopped going. And whenever I told my mom that I wanted to go back, she just said no. She gave no reason for this. She just said no. Eventually, I gave up and I just moved on with my life. But a few weeks ago, I got a call from my cousin. He says, "Hey man, I haven't seen you in forever. You need to come visit me." I'm thinking, why not? My cousin tells me that I can bring a friend or two if I want. He says that he's inviting some of his friends over too. His parents ended up going on a cruise. He's house sitting for them. He's older than me, 25 or 26, or somewhere around there. So I'll go visit with some buddies of mine, Mark and Aiden. I meet my cousin Luke and his 5 friends, Chris, Mary, Henry, Jesse, who's a girl, and Jasper. There's 8 of us in total. Me and my buddies arrive around 1, and we unpack everything. We're greeted with a joint and a beer, and we think this is pretty cool. All of my cousin's friends seem pretty chill as well. We head out to the lake to swim until it's about 3 or 4. As I'm swimming, I just get this bad feeling like somebody is watching me. I wave it off, and I just ignore that feeling. My cousin has a water trampoline for the lake, and also a paddle boat, so we screw around all afternoon until about 6 p.m. And then he tells us, "Alright, let's wrap it up." We all then say, "Oh come on, party pooper." But my cousin waves it off, and even though we argue, he makes us head up to the house. We do eat some pasta for dinner, and it's like 7 p.m. now. It's a beautiful summer night, and I want to go watch the sunset. I then grab a 6-pack and head outside. "Where are you going?" my cousin asks. "Oh, I'm just going outside. It's a nice night." He looks really nervous and says, "I don't know if you should do that. There are bears out there, and they can get pretty close to the house." I then say, well, if that happens, I'll just come back inside. But he still looks worried, like he doesn't want me to go, but he has no proper excuse, so he just lets me go. I'm chilling outside for a bit, and my cousin comes out after a while and he brings his guns with him. Man, what the hell do you need that for? I was born and raised in the suburbs all my life. I never touched a gun before, let alone seen one. He then says, you know, just in case. We sit outside for a while. The sun is gone, and it starts to get dark. My cousin insists that we go inside. I finally give in, and he locks the door behind us. I notice that there's a huge deadbolt on the door, a really big one. There's also 3 smaller locks on the doors as well. I'm thinking that they just like to live secure, and he also mentioned bears. We head upstairs and chill with everybody else. They're watching a movie and smoking some weed. I take a seat next to Mary because she's the hot one, and I've been spitting my game with her all day. After talking for a bit, we head to the room downstairs. We start making out. She's just about to take her top off and then stops. Is something wrong? She doesn't say anything. She just stares behind me like she's looking for something. Then, she screams. But it's the loudest scream that I ever heard. And then she runs out of the room. I look behind me, and there's nothing there. I'm like, damn, am I that ugly? I grab her shirt and follow her out. She's sitting in the middle of the living room. I give her the shirt and stuff. She puts it back on as everyone else runs downstairs. I ask what's wrong, and everyone else is a little bit annoyed. They're like, what the hell was that screaming? People start saying that I was trying to do something to her, and I'm like, no, shut the fuck up. She finally speaks up, and I'm thinking, thanks, now tell them that I didn't do anything to you, before they start thinking wrong. What she says clears my name, but it basically ruins our vacay. She says that at some point she looked out the window, and she thought she saw something because the light was on, and she couldn't really see out the window all that well. And I think, alright, well that makes sense. She then says that all of a sudden, someone's face gets real close to the window, except their face was all wrong, distorted almost. Now I'm thinking, what the fuck? She said that their eyes were all sunken in, and their nose seemed broken off to the side. Everyone is now quiet, listening to her, and says that the mouth was just hanging open, like they had a dislocated jaw or something, thinking that there are some creepy people in the woods watching us. The other girl says, ew, he sounded ugly. Someone else thinks that she's kidding. My friend Aiden chimes in, it was most likely just your reflection. Of course he's telling me that. Everyone kinda chuckles, including myself. And then Mary says, I'm being dead fucking serious right now. I know what I saw. All this time, my cousin is just quiet. He hasn't said a word yet. I then ask him what he thinks, and everyone shuts up to listen to him. He says, I think we shouldn't worry about it right now. He says that he was wrong, and he knew it. Mary gets mad at people for not taking her serious, but she eventually calms down. We all settle down and sleep upstairs in the big room with the TV. The rest of the night is uneventful. We wake up the next day. We're still a little weirded out from last night's events, but fuck it, whatever. It very well could have been just some weirdo out in the woods. It won't happen again. We start out the day just fine. We eat breakfast and go for a morning hike with everyone except Mary, who actually left that morning in her own vehicle. We smoke a little bit and head back, this whole time feeling awfully paranoid that somebody's watching us. We start swimming. We're sitting on the water trampoline. On one of those moments, I'm looking out into the forest, and that's when I see someone standing there. They're pretty far away though, so I can't really see who's there. I then start waving. This person waves back. However, the waves seem real sluggish, like slow motion. There was such a gap of time in between when I waved and it waved back. There's only 5 of us in total at the lake. Myself, Aiden, Luke, Mark, and Chris. Everyone else went to go smoke. I assume it was one of them and they were just really high. I look back at where the person was, and they are now gone. I think that I guess maybe they moved on. I don't know. Everyone who was gone suddenly shows up. I then say, how'd you guys get around the lake so quickly? They're confused. They say they were in the house eating. I say, no, you weren't. I was waving at you. Someone says, dude, what are you talking about? We all been inside. At this point I'm like, fuck, what the hell? I look over at my cousin Luke, and he looks a little bit worried. He looks out into the forest. Now I'm kinda weirded out. At this point I figure out that there's something up that he's not telling us. I get off the water trampoline, and I ask my cousin what the hell is going on. He says, not right now. I'll tell you later. So it's about 6 or 7 p.m. now. Chris, Henry, and Jesse go to the shed to get a shovel. They want to dig a hole so we can have a fire pit. They're gone for a long time. Then suddenly, we hear a screech from the forest. Then, more screeches. Luke tells us all to get the hell inside right now. And there's no argument or debate. We all go inside. As he closed the door, I said, what the fuck is going on? At first he says nothing. And then he says, they're not supposed to come out during the day. They're breaking the rules. I think, man, what the hell are you talking about? What are you saying? That's when we hear a loud banging at the door. We all jump. It's Chris screaming at the top of his lungs, open the fucking door. You guys open the door. Luke then opens the door, and Chris barges in. Henry and Jesse are nowhere to be found. Luke then asks, where's Henry and Jesse? Chris then says, we got separated. These things then started chasing me. Luke then goes around the house and locks all the doors and windows, and even closes the shutters. We then go upstairs and look out the window down the hill, and that's when we see a dozen of figures walking around near the edge of the woods. They weren't even really walking. They were just kind of, I don't know, jittering around like they were having seizures while walking. What the fuck? Aiden says. What? I ask, but I'll need him to answer. Henry and Jesse are on the path on their way from the cabin, as if nothing's wrong. They're just walking really slowly. They walk up to the door, try to get in, and start knocking. Should we let them in? I say. They're still knocking non-stop. Luke is silent for a moment, like he's seen this before, and doesn't want to tell us anything. He then says, it isn't them. What do you mean it's not them? They're still knocking, more than just one hand. It sounds like a bunch of people knocking together. He then says, they're gonna be okay, but that's not them. It looks like them, but it's not. As a matter of fact, we need to leave. We wait until morning, but no one sleeps anything. There's knocking all throughout the night, endless screeching from everywhere. Eventually, the screeching dies down. The knocking fades too. By the morning, Henry and Jesse are still there. I look outside from the window above the front door. They're both staring straight at the door. Suddenly, they both look up at me, and their eyes, they look gone. Deep, empty sockets. Their jaws are slack, and now they're staring into my soul. They didn't have eyes, but I can feel them looking at me, even after I leave the window. Around 9 o'clock, Luke decides that it's time for us to go, and he gives us all golf clubs that belong to his dad. He then says, we're all gonna run to the cars. Don't look, just go. He tells me to drive the Range Rover, and Chris is gonna drive the sedan. After designating where everyone's gonna sit, we all pile up at the back door. Luke then opens it slightly, looks around, and then starts booking it to the car. We all follow. We get in the cars. We see Henry and Jesse running after us, but they aren't running. It's almost like they're sliding across the grass while standing up, almost like puppets on strings. We get in the car. Jasper won't get in the car because he doesn't want to leave them behind. Luke then punches him in the face. He says that they're going to be okay, and he throws them into the passenger seat. We then drive off. Henry and Jesse are chasing us, loud screaming from everywhere. So loud, to the point where they're drowning out the sound of the engine. I then see figures on the side of the road. I would sometimes see faces, and they're exactly how Mary had described them. I wish I could forget them. They looked deformed and improper and not right. They all had slack jaws. One side of the jaw was hanging lower than the other. The shoulders were all lopsided. Their stance was not right, and their legs seemed broken and backwards like a grasshopper's legs. We kept seeing them until we left the forested area. I then drove 90 all the way home. A few days after I got home, I called my cousin and I asked him what the hell happened. He then just kept telling me to forget it. I asked whatever happened to Jesse and Henry. He said he found them barely conscious, covered in bruises and severely dehydrated. They both did end up being okay. When I asked him once again what the hell those things were and what they did to Henry and Jesse, he just said, "They are breaking the rules," and just tells me to forget that this ever happened, because it's easier than explaining it, and you'll just be better off that way. I did one of those at-home DNA testing kits. You know, the ones that they can tell your ancestral makeup, help you connect with long-lost family members or relatives, that sort of thing. The test that I used had this option to make your DNA available to law enforcement. That way, if there was a partial DNA match to a crime scene or victim, my DNA may help law enforcement identify the criminal. Maybe I shouldn't have opted in. The thing is, I've been hearing a lot about these in the news. If you're a true crime fan, you know that these kits can sometimes lead police to catch decades-old serial killers and rapists that have been avoiding capture. My thinking was that if one of my family members is actually a monster, well, I would want them behind bars, regardless of who it is. I opted in, but never really considered the possibility that there would be a match. And then there was. I was contacted by my local police department and notified that my DNA had been a partial match to a Jane Doe, and that they would like my help in identifying her. That was honestly not what I was expecting. I was a match for a dead woman. The police explained to me that our DNA profiles indicated we may have been related, and that they wanted to know if I knew of any relatives who had gone missing or hadn't been heard from in the past 5 years. They determined her time of death was about 5 years ago based on the state of her body when it was found. They have reason to believe it's a homicide, even though they weren't able to tell me the cause of death. Apparently, due to the state of her remains, it was impossible to tell. Well, I didn't know of any family members who had gone missing, but I don't know my extended family all that well. I decided to get my mom involved, who actually does genealogy. She worked with the police, going through our family tree, but she couldn't find anyone. So maybe it was someone we didn't know that we were related to somehow, possibly. At this point, we decided to talk to the rest of my immediate family and even extended to see if anyone else knew anything. Most of our family members thought it was pretty cool and actually wanted to see the mystery solved, even though a few of them were angry at me for giving my DNA to law enforcement in the first place. The police showed us a sketch of what they think the woman would have looked like, and my mom and I agree she has some resemblance to my Aunt Linda, especially in the eyebrows and high cheekbones. The police decided to ask Aunt Linda and her 2 children to submit DNA samples, and they agreed. It took about 2 weeks to hear back from the police after their samples had been submitted. They most likely weren't at the top of the list for the crime lab, but when they did get the results back, they ended up asking Aunt Linda and Bex to come down to the station. The police decided to ask Aunt Linda and her 2 children, one of them whose name is Bex, to submit DNA samples. They agreed. They asked Bex and Aunt Linda specifically to come down to the station. Bex actually asked me to come with her. She and I were really close growing up, basically best friends. We lost touch over the years and time, but I still consider her a close friend. I agreed to go in with her, even though I wasn't really sure why she wanted me there. When the police told us what they found, to say I was shocked is an understatement. The DNA match from Jane Doe was an exact match to Beck's. My initial thought was that there must have been some sort of mistake. I asked what the likelihood is that the DNA matched Beck's without actually coming from her. 1 in 5.4 billion, they said. They told us that this was extremely perplexing and that they had no explanation for the match. I asked Aunt Linda if Beck's had an identical twin that nobody knew about. Maybe, but she shook her head. The police told us that identical twins don't actually have perfectly identical DNA anyway, so that couldn't explain the whole matching. I was concerned. I'm sure you can imagine why. When the police presented them with their evidence and shrugged it off, they laughed. Actually laughed. "Isn't that just the weirdest thing?" said Aunt Linda. They were both smiling and laughing the rest of the time, which clearly made the police uncomfortable. They told the police that they hoped Jane Doe could be identified one day, but that they were pretty sure they couldn't help any further. And then they left the police station. I followed after them in a daze, confused by what the police had told us, and by Beck's and Aunt Linda's behavior. On the way home, I asked Bex if it truly didn't bother her. She said, "There's obviously been some mistake. It's just not possible for my DNA to match exactly with a dead woman. The police screw something up, and they'll probably figure it out in a few days and call us and apologize. Don't worry too much about it." I did try to take her advice. My mom even agreed with her, saying that it must have been some sort of mistake and that it would get cleared up sooner or later. 3 days after we spoke to police, Bex and her 2 children disappeared. My mom had gone over to their place to borrow some family photo albums from Aunt Linda, just to discover that the front door was unlocked and open. Nobody was inside. We tried reaching them on their cell phones, but were informed that their numbers had been all disconnected. Nothing was missing from the house. They didn't take any personal belongings. Their cars were still there. It was like they just disappeared, and they didn't come back. We did report them missing, of course, and a few days after that, the police asked my mom and me to come down to the station. That's when they revealed that they had ran Aunt Linda's and her 2 kids' DNA through their databases and came up with 2 more exact matches to Jane and John Doe, whose bodies were found within 50 miles of each other, and the original Jane Doe. All of them died about 5 years ago. Once is a mistake, or maybe a weird coincidence, but 3 times, the police were baffled. They did ask us for all the information we could give them on my aunt's family. They specifically wanted to know what they were doing 5 years ago. All we could tell them is that they had gone on a family vacation that year and had been gone a week longer than they had planned. Other than that, we had nothing else. It's been a few months since then. The police have no answers for us, and we have no answers for them. I keep waiting for Bex to call or show up, or any of them really. But it's like they vanish off the face of the earth. The worst part is that there's nothing I can do. I've done so much research to try to find something that can explain what's going on, but I can't come up with a theory that makes sense. Nothing grounded in truth anyway. All I wanted to know is if I'm part Irish, and instead I ended up discovering that my family isn't at all what it seems to be. We all have that one friend who's not really into the holidays. You know, the one that won't decorate, won't dress up, won't wish you a happy whatever day it is. And even though he's agreed to come to your theme party, he'll stay in the back the whole time. In most cases, the hate is directed at just one holiday, whether it be Valentine's, Christmas, Easter, or hell, whatever day. My friend Patrick, he hated Halloween with a passion. Now, Patrick hadn't always been that way. I had known him ever since grade school, and we would spend Halloween together. But I noticed a sudden shift in his attitude around the time we got too old to go trick-or-treating, but too young to go out drinking. At first, I figured he was just being a normal teenager. Maybe he thought Halloween was just for babies. Maybe he was pissed off about not being able to go trick-or-treating anymore. Or maybe it was just a phase. Damned if I knew. It wasn't until last year that I found out the real reason. It was a few days before Halloween, and I was able to drag Patrick to a costume party. He had shown up in his usual t-shirt and jeans and told the doorman he was dressed up as a broke college student. He was in that state of semi-drunkenness, where he started slurring his words, but was still mostly coherent. Some chick wearing devil horns and almost nothing else ran into him, and I saw him flinch when he looked at her. He mumbled about how much he hated Halloween, and I finally got around to asking him why. That's when his face drained of color, almost like he hadn't had years to prepare for his answer. He emptied his cup and shuffled nervously from foot to foot. His story started with a promising, "You're not gonna believe this," but when Patrick was 14, his parents left him alone on Halloween night. There was nothing strange there. He was more than old enough to take care of himself. They left him with a bag of candy, and they put him in charge of handing it out to the neighborhood kids. However, they said that he should stop by 10 p.m., lock the doors, and turn off the porch lights. 10 p.m., they insisted, and not a minute later. There were enough kids that night that Patrick had to spend the first half of the evening sitting outside on the front porch, handing out candy to all the kids. Around 8:30 p.m., things started to get quiet down enough for him to head inside, make some popcorn, and start watching a scary movie. He had to pause every few minutes to cater to another cluster of children, but as the evening went on, the visits came fewer, until he only had to get up every 10 minutes or so. He didn't hear a sound for a good 20 minutes until he noticed somebody, a figure making its way up the driveway. Patrick rolled off the couch and checked the time. 10:08 p.m. Most kids had already gone home and were busy sorting through all their candy. Patrick knew from experience that houses tend to give out more treats near the end of the night, so that they can just get rid of all the surplus and close up shop. He figured that this kid was just trying his luck, hoping for a jackpot. It was too late to turn off the lights and pretend he just wasn't home, so Patrick decided that he was going to give the kid the jackpot he deserved, and would go dark as soon as he left. The figure rounded the corner as Patrick headed to the door. By the time that he had armed himself with a handful of candy and opened the door, the figure had reached the foot of the stairs. He then realized that the person just outside the beams of the porch light was much taller than a child, a parent, he figured. Maybe the kid had fell asleep, or was hiding under the thick black cloak the figure was wearing. The man's costume was strange. The fabric looked to be much higher quality than anything you could buy at a store, that's for sure. It was a thick cloak, covering chains that jangled with every movement. 2 black horns protruded from the top of the hood, frayed fabric all around the holes they had torn.
Trick or treat, give me something good to eat,
it said. The voice was so unnatural that it sent a chill down Patrick's spine. He swore to me that it sounded like 2 people had spoken in unison. The figure then took another step up the stairs, which brought him within the radius of the porch light. Patrick could now see he was wearing a mask of a goat. Beneath his hood, 2 yellow eyes with slitted pupils stared at him, and he stared back. The mask, it was so lifelike. Its fur swayed softly in the breeze. It seemed to have its nostrils wet, and the eyes looked very real, as though they had been ripped right off an animal and glued on while they were still fresh. And suddenly, the eyes of the goat blinked. Patrick slammed the door shut and locked it. He could hear the patter of something thick as the figure climbed up the wooden steps. Patrick looked out of the peephole, praying that the man would take his mask off and start laughing at him.
Trick or treat, give me something good to eat,
it said again. Patrick watched as a long, forked tongue slithered out of its mouth and licked its lip with feverish hunger. He strained his eyes enough to notice his feet clicking against the floor. However, it wasn't normal feet. It rammed into the door with all of its might, over and over again. Patrick didn't know what else to do but press himself against the door in hopes of keeping it shut and turning off the porch lights in a vain attempt at pretending he wasn't home. As soon as the lights went off, the creature stopped slamming on the door. The clattering of the footsteps slowly moved towards the living room window. In a panic, Patrick darted to the living room and drew the curtain shut. As he did so, he noticed every other house on the street had already closed their lights. He ran through the house, turning off all the lights he could find, and then ducked behind the couch and hid. Thankfully, the sounds of rattling chains and footsteps had stopped. Patrick studied me as he told me the story, almost as though trying to gauge whether or not I believed him. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't like him to spin yarns, but there was no way his story was true. It was most likely just some dude in a really good costume trying to freak you out, man. Mission accomplished. I reassured him. Patrick shook his head and told me his story wasn't done. He continued. It hadn't been very hard for him to convince himself the whole thing had just been in his head. He figured he had a sugar crash and dozed off mid-movie. It was all just a nightmare, nothing more. That is, until a year later, when Halloween rolled back around. He was home alone again. Well, sort of. He snuck his girlfriend in as soon as his parents' car disappeared down the street. He and his girlfriend left a bowl of candy on the porch and shut the curtains so they could just chill inside. Throughout the night, between the screams of bimbos getting mutilated on TV, they heard kids running up and down the front steps to grab Halloween candy. Again, as the night progressed, fewer and fewer kids showed up, until the trick-or-treaters trickled to a stop. Patrick nor his girlfriend thought to turn off the porch light when 10 p.m. rolled around. Before long, they heard the clunk of something heavy on the porch, followed by a strong knock at the door. Now noticing the time and thinking that the bowl of candy needed to be filled, Patrick walked over and opened the door a crack. He saw a yellow eye with a pupil that darted from side to side until it was fixed upon him.
Trick or treat, give me something good to eat.
It said as a foot kicked at the door. Patrick screamed and slammed the door, attempting to close it. But this goat-headed stranger was putting all of its weight behind it. It was a tug of war, or rather a push of war, with the goat trying to open the door, and Patrick trying desperately to close it. Beads of sweat rolled down his face as Patrick yelled at his girlfriend to help him. Together, they were able to push it far enough to lock the deadbolt, but even then, the goat started to ram against the door. It looked as though the door was going to fall right off its hinges. Patrick's girlfriend was screaming. She hadn't seen what was on the other side of the door, but she knew it was trouble. "Turn off the lights," yelled Patrick as he desperately pressed himself against the door. She flicked them shut, and suddenly, everything went quiet. They waited in the dark for a while, none of them daring to look out the door or pull the curtains open to see if this thing was still outside. It wasn't until they heard the sound of a car up the gravel driveway that the two finally relaxed. I stared at Patrick this time in clear disbelief. It sounded like horse shit to me, or I guess I should say goat shit. He comes every year. If I have so much as one light on, no matter where I'm at, my parents' house, anybody's house, it doesn't even matter. It finds me. I let out a chuckle and patted him on the back. I played it off as a joke, fully expecting him to crack a smile and tell me he was pulling my leg, but he didn't. So I changed the subject and brought him a drink. Halloween came and went, and I forgot all about his story. Which brings us to this Halloween. I was hosting a party at my place. I invited Patrick, but he refused as always. Suddenly, a few minutes past 10 p.m., my phone started ringing. It was Patrick. I picked it up, but all I could hear were his sobs and the sound of violent banging on wood. Imagine the sound of your pissed off landlord banging on your door, demanding payment, times 20. Patrick's mumbles were all mixed up with his choked cries. The lights. He kept saying I didn't understand what he meant. I heard what I thought was his door splintering open. There was a loud slam and the sounds of jangling chains. Patrick screamed, a scream that made my body seize up. And that's when I heard it. I heard the most creepy voice that I could ever hear in my whole life. A voice so cold, it ran daggers through my veins. A voice that echoed through my speaker and seemed to not have one, but two sources. I mean, it sounded like a man, but with that normal voice came one that was deeper and produced an unholy growl with every syllable.
Trick or trick, give me something, or trick.
It said. That's when I heard something being dragged. Patrick's screams and the sound of jangling became distant until I couldn't hear anything anymore. I immediately left my party and sped across town to Patrick's condo. All I found was his phone on the welcome mat, his door hanging off its hinges, and the dozens of solar lights he had installed in his flower bed this past summer. After getting let go at my office job, I was trying to find other means to pay the bills. Unfortunately, not a lot of places were hiring in my area, and the places that were accepting applications were giving out low wages that would just barely cover my living expenses. As the days increased, my search was becoming increasingly limited, until I came across the posting in search of a security guard. It was for a nationally based security company, and they hire people based on the needs of the area. When there's an influx of security requests, it opens up for new applications. To be honest, I wasn't sold on the idea, but the pay was a bit more than the other places that were hiring. The only drawback I could find were the requirements. It was my understanding that I would be assigned to various locations during my time there. One day, I might sit outside a strip mall, and another, I may be walking around a junkyard. I had to think about it for a few moments before typing up and sending off my application. A week went by without any word, and my job hunt continued. I was sure there were more people far better qualified for doing the job, so I tried not to feel too bad about getting overlooked. Then, at the end of the week, I received an email letting me know that I was scheduled for an interview the upcoming Monday. Monday morning arrived. I put on a clean suit and showed up bright and early for the interview. The senior supervisor was a large man sitting behind a desk with multiple stacks of paper on it. He had a very serious demeanor as he looked through my application. He asked me a few passing questions and continued to look through the paperwork. I had no idea if the interview was going well or poor. I just sat there patiently waiting. After a couple more minutes, he looked up from the paperwork and smiled at me. He asked when I would be available to start, and I told him as soon as possible. He nodded and explained that I would be trained over the course of a month. Then I would be dispatched out to various locations for a set amount of time. I thanked him. I shook his hand and I left. That feeling of relief returned as I hopped into my car and drove home. I've been working for the security company for nearly 2.5 years. During my time with this job, I encountered some pretty odd things and guarded even stranger locations. But the reason I'm writing this is due to a job that occurred about a week ago. I had received a call from my supervisor, informing me that I had just gotten assigned to a new location. I asked what sort of job that was, and he said it was just a small warehouse. Apparently, the company that owns it had concerns about theft happening after hours. My boss told me that we were pretty short on manpower, so unless I specifically requested some assistance, I'll be flying solo for the most part. To be honest, I didn't mind being alone for a few nights. The job began on a Tuesday. It took me a bit longer than expected to navigate the streets to the warehouse, even with a GPS. After nearly an hour of driving, I pulled into a small back lot and hopped out of the truck. I stood outside the looming warehouse, so much for it being small. I took out the keys that I had picked up beforehand and entered the rear door. I noticed the security system on my right beginning to beep, and I quickly disarmed it. I flicked the light switch and turned. When I did, I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a face directly in front of me. I took a step back, almost falling back out the door. Catching my breath, I realized what type of warehouse this was. It was a mannequin storage warehouse. There were hundreds of mannequins of all shapes and designs standing around the building, their formless faces, all desperately trying to grab the attention of any would-be shopper. I zipped up my jacket and rubbed my eyes and began getting a lay of the land. There were a few offices towards the back and workbenches set up throughout the space. Many crates lined the walls, but apart from the mannequins themselves, everything appeared to be normal. I spent the first evening just hanging around inside my truck. I would periodically check the back door but saw nothing out of the ordinary. At around 2:30 in the morning, I was catching up on some Netflix on my phone when I heard a sound coming from outside. My attention was instantly pulled to the door of the warehouse. The sound of a door shutting. I turned off my phone. I got out and walked over to the door. I pulled the door open and peeked inside with my flashlight. Nothing immediately stood out. I called out to the interior, asking if anyone was in here, but not a single sound filled the silence. I checked my watch and returned back to my truck. I only had a few hours left before I could head home. I angled my truck to face the door and made a point to keep a better eye on it until the end of my shift. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, and at the end of my shift when I went to lock up, I thought one of the mannequins had moved slightly, but quickly buried the thought before heading home. The next 2 days on the job went about as normal as you would expect. No noises, no sign of entry or exit, just a lot of time sitting around doing nothing. Then, on the third day, I showed up to the warehouse a bit later because I woke up late. The time was close to 10:30 p.m., a good hour and a half past when I was supposed to be there. I had been late a handful of times over the 2 years working for this company, and it's really not a big deal. I parked and went to check the interior, and that's when I noticed something strange. As I put the key into the door, I didn't feel any resistance. I twisted the knob, and the door popped open. Whoever works here must have forgot to lock up after their shift. I stepped inside to disable the alarm, and nearly fell on my ass as I saw a mannequin standing immediately to my right. It was arranged in a walking pose, with its right arm reaching out towards me. I quickly regained my composure and picked it up and moved it a few feet away, so I could reach the system. I disabled it. I walked around and inspected the area again. Nothing caught my attention. I resumed my routine of sitting outside and keeping watch until my shift was over. When I went back inside to set the alarm again, I gave one more glance around, and everything was fine, until my light cascaded over the mannequin that I had moved at the start of my shift. It was standing straight up, with its arms at its sides, and its head was now looking towards the door. I pretended not to notice. I set the alarm, and I quickly stepped outside, locking the door behind me. I lightly jogged back to my truck, and once inside began to question what I saw. That mannequin was definitely in a different position at the beginning of the night, and I didn't adjust it, aside from moving it a few feet. I drove home and drank a nice tall glass of whiskey before drifting off to bed. The last day made me question whether or not to continue being a security guard. I showed up on time and went inside to check things out. There were more mannequins than on the first day, and I just assumed that they had brought more in. After my once over, I returned to my truck and began to watch a TV show on my phone. About 45 minutes into the series, I glanced up
and saw something that sent goosebumps down my arms. The door to the warehouse was completely open. I got out and walked over to it. I stepped inside with my flashlight and called out asking if anyone was in here. I waited for a moment, and just when I was about to close the door and head back to the truck, the sound of something clattering in the back rang out. I felt myself jump in my skin. Something had to have caused that noise, I thought. I called out once more, summoning every ounce of courage in me to step inside. I turned the light switch on and looked around. Everything seemed fine, aside from the mannequins. I walked to the back where I heard the noise and found a small paint can resting on its side. Only there was nothing around it, not even any mannequins. I turned back to the door, and I kid you not, I watched as a mannequin stepped into my vision and pulled the door shut, while another one reached out and flicked the light switch. I shouted, dropping my flashlight in the process. I could hear the clattering of plastic and metal hitting the ground as I stood there frozen in the dark. Regaining my senses, I quickly knelt down and searched for my flashlight. My hand rested on what I assumed to be the flashlight, but it felt different. It was in the shape of a plastic foot. I recoiled back into my side and felt my flashlight next to me. I picked it up, pointing it in front of me. There were 4 mannequins all standing around me, their heads twitching to the left and right real fast, like they were trying to listen for sounds without ears. One of them reached out for me, and I scrambled backwards. When I did, I bumped into something solid. I turned, flashlight in hand, and saw another mannequin looming over me. Unable to react, and in that moment of hesitation, I felt a sharp impact on my neck. My vision went wide, followed by darkness. Sometime later, I awoke. My head was spinning. As I regained focus, I realized I was now sitting in my truck. I quickly looked around, wondering how I ended up back in here. I began to wonder if I had possibly fallen asleep in my truck, and that whole ordeal was just some sort of nightmare. The next morning, I received a call from my boss, saying that the warehouse owner said that I had left the door unlocked the previous night. I apologized to him for the mistake, and he brushed it off, saying it wasn't that much of a big deal. I then told him that I wanted to use some of my vacay time and take off for a while. He understood and said it'll be fine. Just before we got off the phone, however, I suggested not taking any more jobs from that location. He attempted to ask why, but all I could say was, the mannequins don't seem to like security guards. He took it as a joke and chuckled before telling me to enjoy my vacay. I'm not exactly sure what happened, if it was all in my imagination or not, but I think I'm gonna pass on guarding warehouses, at least for a while. It was supposed to be just another uneventful night alone. I had spent a lot of nights by myself without the ever watchful eyes of my parents. Being only 15, some people might consider that neglect, while others may just think it's unimpressive. A good friend of mine would often brag about staying home alone frequently at such an early age. It wasn't as impressive when I found out that his single mother worked 2 jobs to support him. It was quite sad, actually. Ironically, another friend of mine who was 2 years older than me tells me that he's not even allowed to go outside after 8 p.m., let alone stay at the house by himself. Me, on the other hand, have carefully crafted a trust between my parents. I never begged nor pleaded that I was mature enough to be left alone. I just did what I was told, and eventually, the opportunity presented itself. My dad had come to me one night when I was 13 to tell me that he and mom were going out to see a movie. They had attempted to find a babysitter, but were unsuccessful. So instead, they asked if I would be alright with staying home alone for a few hours. I shrugged and told them that I would be fine, and that I'll just play some video games and go to bed. My father reminded me about my homework, to which I actually groaned to an agreement. They left, and I nearly lost myself in the excitement. I know it may not sound that thrilling, but I'm sure a lot of people remember the first night they got to stay home alone. I ran around my house, causing a ruckus for about 15 minutes. Then, I retired to my bedroom and played video games most of the night. Around 10 minutes before they returned, I scribbled some answers on my homework and dove into bed, trying to force myself to sleep. I heard them open the door to check on me before slowly closing it. After that night, being left home alone wasn't all that. Don't get me wrong, every time it happened was a welcome event. I could watch movies my parents didn't quite agree with. I could play video games endlessly, and the fridge was full of snacks, so long as I didn't make a mess in the kitchen and didn't set the house on fire. Everything would be fine. But that brings me to last night. My parents were both heading out of town to visit family. Most likely my least favorite people on the planet. They were awful. I would have to listen to my uncle just talk to me all the time, especially about discipline. I once walked out of the bathroom at their house and had forgotten to tuck my shirt in. My uncle snatched me up by the collar and shouted, "There is clothing etiquette in this house." My uncle just likes to make jokes about my appearance or intelligence. The phrase, "dumbass kid," has been told to me on more than one occasion. These instances only seem to happen when my parents weren't nearby though. Trust me, I complained to my parents about my auntie and uncle, yet they would just tell me that they're very particular about their house, and that my uncle lost his filter in the war. So when my parents were getting ready to leave, my mother said the magic words I wanted to hear. "You don't have to come if you don't want to." Inside I had an explosion of happiness. During their packing, they gave me the rundown on everything I needed to know. They put all the emergency numbers on the fridge, including their own. They left me $40 to order pizza over the weekend. Then they gave me the warning that if I do anything wrong, that I'll reap the consequences. As I stood there on the porch watching them drive away, I felt a bit of remorse for not going with them, but the thought of my uncle's screaming face quickly diminished it. I headed back inside and fell onto the couch in the living room. I lay there for an hour or so, changing the channel on the TV every so often. After an hour of mindlessly frying my brain, I heard a knock on the front door. This jolted me awake, and I quickly turned off the TV, almost like if I was doing something wrong. When my senses came back to me, I got up and walked over to the door. I didn't think we were expecting anyone, so I was hesitant. I slowly turned the knob to the door and cracked it open. Nobody was there. I opened the door a bit further and saw a delivery package sitting on the porch. Those delivery guys are like ninjas, I swear. I laughed off my nerves and brought the package inside. When I set the box down on the counter, I noticed something strange. The TV in the living room was on, even though I was positive I had shut it off when I first heard the knock. I turned off the TV once again and went into my bedroom to play some video games. It seemed like I had only been playing for 20 minutes, but when I looked at the clock, nearly 4 hours had passed. The sun had long since set, and I rubbed my tired eyes. When I took my headset off, that's when I first heard a new noise. It sounded like a tapping coming from somewhere, even though I couldn't figure the location out. I thought it was a leaky pipe somewhere in the house. I got up and went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water before heading to bed. I looked around the dark living room while I sipped my water. I'm not sure if it was just the lack of light or my growing fatigue, but the room felt ominous. The whole house did. In fact, I quickly finished in the kitchen and walked fast back to my bedroom. After changing and getting into bed, I found myself unable to sleep. I just laid in the darkness, listening to that tapping noise. A few minutes later, I started to notice something about the tapping noise. The sound was moving. It was faintly echoing from my living room and moving down the hall towards my bedroom. I couldn't be sure, but that's what it sounded like to me. My nerves came back as I laid on my side, watching my door. I half expected something to burst in and attack me just then, but nothing did. Only the tapping persisted. An hour ticked by, and the tapping started to move again. By this point, I was pretty sure it wasn't just a leaky pipe. The tapping followed along my wall up into my ceiling, before stopping directly above my head. I felt my throat tighten. I stared at my ceiling without blinking. Then, I saw something begin to take shape above me. I know this all sounds strange, but trust me, I'm not entirely sure how to explain it. I watched as a hand began to push its way through my ceiling. It wasn't like something was in the attic, clawing its way through the wood and dry wall. No, it was like something from another dimension was now entering my room. The fingers pushed through first, followed by a hand. I could see its pale skin. An arm followed next. Then a few inches away another hand appeared. The hands and arms dangling from my ceiling. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then what appeared to be black strings began to poke through in between the two arms. It was hair. Slowly the hair grew closer to me as I stared in disbelief. Then a head began to take shape. The head was facing away from me, so I couldn't see its face right away, except for more black hair. Then the shoulders formed until half of its body was now dangling from my ceiling, just above my head. The body twitched slightly, like an electric current was jolting through it. Slowly, the body began to bend backward, and the head lifted up to face me. A gasping, wheezing sound filled in my previously silent room. That's when I saw her face. She looked like a woman, in her early 20s maybe. Her eyes were glassy and vacant, yet somehow I knew she was still staring directly at me. But what terrified me the most about this woman hanging from my ceiling was her mouth. She was completely missing her lower jaw. Her tongue was dangling near her face. She wheezed as she stared at me, her arms growing closer and closer. I wanted to scream, but at the same time I didn't want to move for fear that I would induce a reaction out of her. Her hands reached my face. Her fingers felt like icicles against my skin. I shut my eyes, praying the whole thing was just some horrific nightmare. She forced her frigid fingers into my mouth and attempted to pry my jaw open. Suddenly, I felt my senses come back to me, and I screamed, swinging at the creature. I flailed and rolled out of my bed. I dashed out of my bedroom down the hall and called my parents immediately. My mom was understandably upset when I called her, but I didn't know what else to do. I told her I was having a pretty messed up nightmare, and I asked her to stay on the phone with me while I went to go check my room. The woman was gone, and so was that ominous feeling that I had felt previously. My mother tiredly told me they would be home tomorrow night, and told me to go back to bed. I thanked her for answering, but after I hanged up the phone, I didn't go to sleep. I stayed up all night, watching TV in the living room. I'm not sure what, or who that was, or why it was even targeting me. Maybe it was just looking for someone who was all alone and decided that I was an easy target. Maybe it was just an extremely vivid nightmare. I'm not sure, but I think the next time that my parents decide to go out of town, I'll be going with them as well. Jasmine, Ariel, David, and I were all lovers of scary stuff, and we were craving a new and thrilling adventure. We had gone on ghost tours, we had visited cemeteries late at night, but we had never really experienced anything truly paranormal or scary. So this time we decided to rent a cabin in the deep woods in the Appalachian Mountains for a week to actually try to experience something creepy, you can say. Something about putting yourself in a situation like that really seems to get your adrenaline going. You know that feeling? That same feeling that makes you want to drive through an isolated back road at night, hoping you don't get a flat tire, but at the same time hoping something does happen so you can get that experience from a scary movie. Or is this just me?
Anyways, we couldn't leave my husky dog Lucy behind, so she joined us as well. The cabin that we had rented was completely isolated from everybody. Here, there was no connection to anybody, the absence of the internet, and the reach of Wi-Fi only inside the house made us enjoy everything much more. The cabin itself was really nice and towered with the trees that seemed to stretch into the sky, with its wooden exterior and with a stone chimney rising on one side. Inside, the warm glow of the cabin lights covered us, casting a small glow into the wooden floors. Old pictures and artwork were all around the walls. The cabin featured expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows and glass sliding doors that opened into the balcony into the backyard. These impressive glass panels were designed to connect between the cabin's interior and the natural beauty of the surrounding forest. During the day, they flooded the living space with natural light, and at night, they transformed the cabin into a cozy place where one could still appreciate the serene beauty of the outdoors while staying safe and comfortable inside. This way, even if you were inside the cabin, it still almost felt like you were outside. Anyways, the first day after a long day of hiking and exploring the trails, we returned to the cabin and I decided to settle down with a bath before enjoying some peaceful time on the balcony. As the sun began to set, I stepped out into the big 2-story balcony with my dog Lucy and iced coffee and my phone to put on some scary stories to enjoy the view, and last, with some weed. Because, let's face it, a vacation isn't complete with a little relaxation, right? The balcony extended from the cabin's rear, making us feel as though we were high above the ground, offering a clear view of the big landscape. There was a staircase on the side of the balcony that would lead down to the bottom, which Lucy quickly descended to go play in the field. The huge balcony was almost like 30 by 30 feet, perfect for gatherings and hangouts at night. Speaking of the landscape, it was incredibly spacious, and you could easily distinguish the property line where the land gave way to dense tall trees. From this point, I could take in the panoramic view from the field where Lucy was, chasing squirrels and enjoying the spacious freedom. It's hard to describe, but it was a breathtaking view, a serene moment. However, my smoky getaway session was cut short. Just as I settled down with my iced coffee and was getting ready to roll some papers, Lucy began barking towards the woods. Her barks echoed through the trees, sending shivers down my spine. I quickly got up to investigate, but I couldn't see Lucy anywhere, nor did the depths of the woods reveal anything. I called and practically yelled for Lucy to return, since at this point I could hear the echoes of her barks. But she continued barking before I eventually saw her come out the woods and run back towards the field, up the stairs, and get behind me almost like something had scared her. But this was weird. Lucy, who almost never showed fear of anything, had me baffled. I glanced back over the balcony, trying to see what might had scared her, but there was nothing there. I decided to head back inside with Lucy. I slid the door open, having her to hurry inside. As I entered, I saw Jasmine, Ariel, and David, who were all watching a scary movie in the living room. Jasmine quickly asked, "Back so soon?" They were aware of my little ritual, if you could call it that. Whatever you like, but this was my way of relaxing and also managing my anxiety. Besides, there was something relaxing about combining a smoke session with some scary stories. Speaking of a ritual, they had put on a movie called The Ritual, which I had already seen. However, I asked if I could join them for a rewatch. I mean, it's not like they were going to say no. Anyways, my dog Lucy quickly went to go lay down on the floor, where everyone was at, and I sat alongside everyone else. I quickly forgot about what had possibly scared Lucy, but I guess it was because there was something about being out in the darkness that seemed to play tricks on my mind. Maybe too many horror movies had left their mark. Regardless, as the night continued, we all eventually fell asleep in the living room. On the second day of our trip, we collectively agreed to try to embrace the solitude and stay in.
It was a day dedicated to showing our cooking and grilling skills. As everyone took turns in the kitchen, the smell of sizzling barbecue filled the air as laughing and friendly competition started. We dug out our collection of board games, cards, and puzzles. The purpose was clear. We aimed to disconnect from social media as much as possible, cherishing the simple moments of each other's company and engaging in each other's conversations. To be honest, it turned out to be a challenge. I think the fucks of life and all this shit in today's world makes us forget about true connections and relationships. But this was most especially challenging for Jasmine, battling the temptation to post on her various social media accounts, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, which is now known as X. She fidgeted with her phone, her fingers itching to scroll through her social media feed. Sitting nearby, I chuckled and said, "Jas, you've been looking at that phone for hours. You're not missing much out there in the digital world." Jasmine sighed, torn between her phone and the challenge to stay disconnected. "I know, but it's just so difficult. I want to share our cabin adventures with all my followers," she said. I smirked. I came ready for this. And feel free to steal my idea if you ever take a trip and need to disconnect. So I offer her a solution. How about we capture these moments the old-fashioned way? With a Polaroid camera, we can create physical memories to look back on. That will be the fun part too, that we actually won't know how the pictures are gonna look. The eyes of Jasmine opened up. "You know what? That sounds kind of fun. Let's do it." And with that, she set her phone aside, embracing the charm of capturing memories in an old traditional way. Once we had wrapped up our day of cooking, games, and quality time, I decided to freshen up with a shower, getting ready for my nightly ritual on the balcony. However, convincing Lucy to join me outdoors with a little encouragement, she finally gave in, and together we ventured into the balcony. The view remained as breathtaking as ever, casting a soothing view, almost a welcoming aroma, over me. Despite the serene setting, a lingering unease still tugged at my senses from the previous day, but I brushed it off and I settled down, placing my container of God's green leafy substance on one side and my iced coffee on the other. With my phone in hand, I went through my collection of downloaded YouTube videos, all of them about scary stories. As I lost myself in the stories, my imagination painted the eerie scenes in my head. Lucy, once again, was playing around in the yard. I could hear her running back and forth, her energetic running drawing my attention. But then I heard as she ran towards the side of the cabin, possibly going to the front. As I immersed myself in the stories on my phone and started to enjoy my nightly ritual, a doubt began at the back of my mind. It was a sensation that I couldn't shake, one that triggered thoughts of a book I had read once, The Gift of Fear. The book talked about countless stories of people who had experienced this creepy feeling, acting in ways they normally wouldn't. According to the author, it's a survival instinct buried deep within our brains, capable of sensing even the smallest hints of danger, often without our rational minds being aware. It's a testament to show how our brain is so smart. So in that moment, I decided to pause my phone, allowing the abrupt silence to engulf the surroundings. The world outside seemed to be quiet. There was no sound from the woods, no nightly critters, nothing, just pure silence. I know you might be thinking that I'm possibly just high, but no, the sensation was different. It wasn't the blissful cloud nine feeling anymore. Something felt off. And it was one of those situations where a minor, small detail could be more scarier than outright horror. I swiftly grabbed my iced coffee and, almost forgetting my precious weed, rushed back inside, leaving behind the quietness of the night. As I opened the door, my friends turned their attention towards me, curiosity on their faces. I must have worn a startled expression because Jasmine was the first to ask, "Hey, are you okay? You look like you seen a ghost." I hesitated for a moment, then replied, "You know that feeling when something just doesn't sit right? Like something's off, even though you can't put your finger on it?" I asked, but they just looked at me, weird. Anyways, that was enough for me and I decided to call it a night. Later that night, I woke up having to use the restroom. As I stumbled towards the living room to get to the bathroom, strange noises on the other side of the glass windows and door caught my attention. My heart raced as I saw a dark silhouette, standing upright on two legs. I felt my heart drop. I had seen too many fucking scary movies to even think of the possibilities of what was out there. I froze, and the dark figure started moving desperately as if trying to come inside. For a second I thought I was dreaming, and so I closed my eyes hoping I would wake up. But when I opened them, the thing was still there. Fuck this, I said. I ran and reached for the light switch to light up the outside. And that's when I saw Lucy. Holy shit, I couldn't believe I had forgotten all about her. I quickly opened the door to let Lucy back inside, grateful that it was just her this whole time. On the third day, I was ready to leave, to be honest. I don't know what it was, but I just felt like we weren't supposed to be here. And this was proven on this third night. My friend Jasmine decided to join me on the balcony. I didn't bring Lucy outside as she forcefully didn't even want to, so Jas decided to join me. We sat in silence, admiring the beauty of the field that was lit up by the moon before us. It was a good moment, enjoying our iced coffee, and once Jasmine finished hers, she decided to go back inside. As I started pulling out the weed, she looked back and said, "Well, how long are you going to be out here for? It's getting pretty late." I thought about it. Something about smoking weed helped me calm down and forget the way I was feeling. So I shrugged my shoulders and said, "It all depends." I laughed and she said, "Well, don't stay." She stopped in her words and looked towards the field down. I looked at her and said, "I won't be out here too long." "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is what?" I said. She didn't say anything, so I decided to stand up and see what she was looking at. I followed her gaze and that's when I saw it. A bizarre figure standing in the field. It was a naked woman, her pale body stark against the dark landscape. We couldn't make out her features, but the sight sent a shiver down my spine. Her pale, naked body was moving in a slow, eerie, and disturbing manner towards us, and she was taking steps slowly. The moon was lighting up parts of her face, and I could see her jaw was hanging low, giving her a grotesque and unnatural appearance. Then, almost as if she noticed that we had seen her, she let out a wheezing sound, almost like a whisper escaping her throat. That's when she started to run towards us. Her head was tilted sideways, giving her an even more unsettling look. Her movements were stiff, as if her body was not fully under her control. It was a horrifying sight. As we stared in shock at this woman running towards us, frozen in fear, her appearance became more scary, as her pale naked body contorted in ways that defied all logic. Suddenly, she lost her balance and fell to the ground. I'm not sure who or what we were staring at this point. It was as if we had become paralyzed by fear, as we could only continue to watch her. Then, her movements started to grow more erratic. She began crawling on all fours, her hands and knees scraping against the ground. It was a fucking disturbing sight. Then she suddenly got back up, her hair hanging in tangled locks around her face. As she entered the light of the balcony underneath us, we saw that she had no eyes. Instead, where her eyes should have been, there were just empty black sockets. It was a horrifying sight as she continued to approach us with her head tilted sideways and her slack jaw. But what truly horrified us and snapped us back to retreat inside the cabin was when she fucking started to ascend the stairs that led up to the balcony with distorted movements. What made the sight even more scary was that it appeared as if she was looking up at us, despite her lack of eyes. Her head was still sideways, and her slack jaw remained open. We rushed back inside and found the others in the living room. Jasmine and I screamed at them, telling them that someone was outside looking like something out of The Exorcist. They stared at us in disbelief. Jasmine then said, "We're not fucking around, we both saw it." David and Ariel decided to investigate. And David said, "If you're pulling a prank, both of y'all sleeping outside tonight." We all looked towards the outside balcony, but there was no sign of anyone. David slid the door open, scanned the area, and said, "There's nobody out here." Reluctantly, we all stepped outside, and I said, "I'm not fucking kidding. There was someone or something out here." Jasmine chimed in, "Yeah, we both saw her." David then remarked, "Well, I guess she's gone now. Must be some psycho living out here in the woods, huh?" Even though they didn't believe us, that's when we all heard it. That same wheezing sound. David immediately said, "What the fuck is that?" We realized the noise was coming from right beside us, and we looked towards the staircase, which was at the end of the balcony on the side, and that's when I saw a dark silhouette, crouched in the corner. "There she fucking is," Jasmine said. "Fuck this, I'm out of here," I said as Jasmine quickly opened the door. That's when I saw that this woman started crawling on all fours with an unnatural jerky motion. Her limbs seemed to be dislocated, and her body contorted as she moved towards us. David, with panic in his voice, screamed at us to hurry the fuck up, as he was the one behind all of us, and we rushed to get inside the cabin. The wheezing sound from the woman grew louder, and even more scary as she closed the distance between us. David, being the last one, slid the door shut and locked the door, looked towards the glass, but she was no longer there. That's when Lucy started barking towards the windows too. "Alright, what the fuck was that?" David said. Jasmine and Ariel started crying, saying that they no longer wanted to be here. I mean, I agree with them. We decided to call search and rescue as we figured that was the only solution here. They advised us to stay put and not move, and to make sure that everything is locked, including all windows and doors. However, they did tell us it would take about a couple of hours for someone to get there. Those hours took basically all night, because we all ended up together in the living room, huddled together, with kitchen knives in hand, in case we needed to do what we had to do to survive. But the worst part was that wheezing sound. That awful, dreadful sound that she had been making continued to echo throughout the cabin, with noises that also sounded like her running around the exterior of the cabin. And at one point, it even sounded like she was running on the roof of the cabin. Eventually, the noises stopped when the sun began to rise, and we could see the light coming through the big glass windows that led to the balcony. Then, we heard knocking at the front door. I went to go inspect, and it was a park ranger. We tried explaining everything, but of course, he didn't believe us. He did look around the cabin in every corner, and even went down to the backyard to look, but he didn't see any signs of anything. I know the report that he probably wrote up, that a bunch of assholes decided to get drunk and one of them pulled a prank. But I kid you not, this actually happened. And lesson learned, I will never go to a remote cabin ever again. I figured I would share this with you all, since it seems like everyone here enjoys knowing some paranormal experiences. But I'm not sure what this was. Maybe it was some psycho fuck just wanting to scare people. But who would actually in their right minds be enjoying doing this in the middle of nowhere? On top of that, the way she was moving is impossible for any normal human to move. Anyways, I don't know, but sometimes when I lay down at night in bed, I swear I can hear noises coming from the roof with that same wheezing sound. I'm a bird hunter who lives in Oregon. I have a Flushing dog I train to hunt. His name is Reggie, who I take out most weekends of the hunting season to look for quail or whatever else there is. For the last 3 years,
The only meat I have ate from mid-September through the end of January has been the birds my dog and I hunt. Also the elk or deer that I usually bag during the season. It's actually something I've become pretty passionate about. 2 weekends ago was the end of quail, so I planned a day trip out to East Oregon. For those who don't know, most of Oregon is essentially a desert. The area between the Cascade Mountains and the Pacific is rainy and forested. However, with the exception of a few small mountain ranges, 2/3 of the state east of the Cascades is just red rocks, brush, and country for hundreds of miles, all the way to the Idaho border. Even though it's quite cold this time of the year, it's still amazingly beautiful, with literally millions of acres of public land. I loaded Reggie and my gear into the truck early Saturday morning, several hours before sunrise, and set off. Just at first light we got to a big, open river valley I had spent lots of time exploring, but this certain area was new to me. It was about 30 degrees, looked like a light dusting of snow the night before, but otherwise pretty dry, and would be a fairly clear day. I love these moments, maybe more than anything in life. Being the only human in a massive wild landscape without a single trail or building for miles, the isolation, the giddiness of the upcoming adventure, the feeling of exploring an area that looked the same 500 years ago, the feeling of going out to get my own food, the contrast between hot coffee in my thermos and the cold winter wind on my exposed hands. All of it, just my favorite place to be. I got the dog ready and put on my boots and pack, loaded a shotgun, and we set off along the top of the valley ridge, 600 to 700 yards above the river, looking over the cold landscape. For those who never seen it, watching a hunting dog work is a truly fascinating spectacle to behold. It's honestly why I enjoy upland bird hunting so much. To me, watching a really good hunting dog actively hunt for wild game birds is honestly not that much different from watching a trained dolphin or sea lion at SeaWorld or something like that. A work dog doing its job can be so focused and intelligent, it's shocking sometimes. I trained Reggie well, but so much of it is just primal. It's Reggie's 6th hunting season, so we spend hundreds of days off trail, exploring the backcountry, and we have really learned to read each other well. Coastal rainforest, high desert, alpine mountains, hardwood forest, farmland, swamps, marshes. We have adventured through it all together. If there's a game bird near, Reggie sells it. I can tell by the way that he moves his tail, the frequency of sniffing, and the lateral angles of his turns. I can tell if he smells another person from how he looks back at me. I can tell if he smells a coyote, wolf, bear, or mountain lion from how he drops his spine. I can tell if he smells an elk, deer, or moose from how he tilts his head to catch the wind. He's my best friend, and we're actually a real, solid team. About an hour after we started hiking along the valley ridge, we came to a gully that cut downhill through the ridge towards the river, which we would have to cross. I picked the way down the steep rise to the other dry, boulder-filled creek bed at the bottom of the gully, where a deer trail led back up to the other side. Halfway down the slope, Reggie started acting real strange. He stopped about 30 feet in front of me, cocked his head to the side, and fixed his gaze down to our left, towards the spot in the dry creek bed as it dropped down the valley. He then leaned his head, as if trying to get a better view, and then started turning around towards me without pulling his eyes off the spot, which he really only does when he's actually scared of something, like when we go to the vet, or I start up a chainsaw. Then he bolted up the steep side of the gully to where I was standing. "What is it, bud?" He kept switching his gaze from my eyes to the same spot below us, while pacing around in half circles. Strange. My first thought was mountain lion. which I always have at the back of my mind. They're all over the place out here. But they clear out long before they let people, let alone a person with a dog, get this close to them. We gotta cross this gully and keep moving, so I patted the dog on the head and kept on moving down towards the bottom of the gully. Reggie stayed right on my heels the entire time. The bottom of the gully was a dry creek bed loaded with car-sized boulders, with a lot of rocks and gravel running between the rock formations and steep, grassy walls of the gully. As I was crunching over the gravel, Reggie stopped in the middle of the creek bed and once again was fixed on something to our left, down the gully. This time he dropped his spine and I could see his hackles raise. Oh shit, I thought. Maybe there is some kind of animal in the rocks down there. I flipped the safety off my shotgun and started talking to Reggie in the quote-unquote cute buddy tone I use when I'm trying to calm him down. I started walking towards a big boulder in the middle of the creek bed that was blocking my view. Looked like once I was past it, I would have a clear field of view over the entire gully, all the way down to the valley side of the river. Reggie was still frozen in place. I patted his head as I passed on his right side. Once I got a few paces past him, I noticed he wasn't following me, which he always did, even if it was a bear ahead of us. I looked back at him. Let's go, bud. Let's go get it. He started pacing around in half circles again, with his ears back and his tail down. What the fuck, I thought. Definitely never seen him do this before, unless again, we're like at the vet. I seen him chase 400-pound black bears off my property and squabble with countless coyotes. He's not scared of much. This got me pretty anxious. I shouldered my shotgun and decided that before we keep moving, at this point, checking behind a boulder where something had the dog all tweaked out was a safe thing to do. So I moved quickly. In my experience dealing with black bears and mountain lions, 99.9% of the times you bump into one, they're terrified and run away as fast as they possibly can, especially when surprised by something with confident movement that's making lots of noises. But definitely don't do this with a grizzly bear. I heard Reggie start following me as I started to move around the boulder. I came around the big rock on the right side, and in front of me was a big clearing in the creek bed and a huge, big horned sheep, a ram, no more than 25 feet in front of me. We run into big horned sheep out in this country all the time, so it wasn't that much of a surprise. What was surprising was how this thing was sitting. That's the only way I can think to describe it. It was sitting on its folded back legs, like a dog or cat would, holding itself up with a straight back posture, with its front legs locked in the gravel, staring straight ahead, so I couldn't see its face. These are very skittish animals. They would never let a person get this close. A bunch of things went through my mind at the same time. Maybe it's dead. No, it was cold, and I could see steam coming from its slow breathing. Maybe it's wounded and dying. Maybe it's stuck on some old fencing or something. Right then, Reggie started barking. Not just barking, but like snarl barking, like he was in a fight. He's a pretty quiet dog generally, and he never barks at deer, elk, or rams. Maybe prances after them for a few seconds. That's if we bump into one when we're hiking and we spook it. But he's never been very interested in big mammals. It actually startled me. I looked back at him, and he had his front legs splayed out. His head was down, his tail was down, his hackles were raised up so high that he didn't even look like Reggie no more, and he was fully showing his teeth and barking and snarling like I never seen. He looked feral, like a coyote. I could hear the snap of his teeth as he barked again and again. I looked back at the ram, still, just sitting there, unmoving, staring straight ahead. Now that was fucking strange. I never known a wild mammal to do anything but run away. terrified at the presence of a canine, let alone not even move a muscle with a canine being aggressive. I was pretty convinced at that point that the ram had to be real sick or super fucked up in some way. Definitely close to death, even if it was tangled up on something, or maybe he had got trapped in a leg snare. It would be freaking the hell out with a dog going crazy next to it, the way Reggie was. "Reggie, here!" I yelled to him. Here is sort of my catch-all command for him, meaning, stop what you're doing and get to my heels right fucking now. Reggie didn't even look at me. I took my shotgun in my left hand, turned and took a step towards the dog and pointed at the ground in front of me, and pretty much screamed, "Reggie, here!" Again, nothing. He just kept barking and snarling at the ram. That really put me on edge. He had never just completely ignored a firm command before. It's like I wasn't even there. I turned back to the ram and shouldered my shotgun again. Something was wrong. Real fucking wrong. All my years spent in the backcountry, hunting and tracking big game animals. I literally have guided ram hunts professionally, just one valley over, and I had never seen anything like this. The wind was picking up down the gully. I felt its bite on my hands. The light dusting of snow from the night before was getting whipped up around the gully. I started moving around the ram to its right, trying to gain some elevation to stay somewhat above it, as I rounded its position to get a look at its face. Bighorn sheep don't attack people. They're skittish as hell, so I wasn't scared of that. But this thing seemed unwell, so I figured all bets were off. As I was sidestepping around it, the wind in the gully started messing with the pressure in my ears. I felt like I was landing while inside an airplane, and my eyes popping slightly dulled the volume of Reggie snarling and barking, and the wind howling down around the rocks. My heart was pounding pretty good at this point. I got to a spot about 8 feet directly to its right, and about 3 to 4 feet above it, up the slope of the gully, and could start to make out its face. My heart rate was going insane, uniquely so, to the point I actually noticed the pressure change made it so I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears, and feeling it in my cheeks and eyes. It felt like I had taken a few Red Bulls, then sprinted a mile. Trying to calm myself down and get a grip only made me more jumpy and anxious. I took another step and could see its mouth. It was slightly open, with milky snot running from its nose and saliva dripping from its bottom lip, with little spurts and flecks shooting out every time it exhaled a steamy breath. What the fuck? I kept saying out loud. I took another step and could start to see its eyes behind the big, full curls of its horns, which were pocked with scars and abrasions from a lifetime of fighting other rams and existing in this hard, rocky country. I took another step so I was able to essentially look at it from the front for the first time and see its full features. It had tears pouring out of its eyes, and it sounded almost like it was moaning. Alright, I thought, this thing is incredibly fucked up. Is it a virus or something? Is its lower spine broken? I wanted to put it out of its misery, but shooting a bighorn sheep without a license is a felony with a $15,000 fine. So I started thinking about hiking back and calling the fish and game officers. I lowered my shotgun and was about to turn to go back towards the dog when it snapped its head up to the right and looked right at me. Until my last day alive, I will never forget that moment. All the wind was knocked out of me, or sucked out of me. It felt like I was free falling with my stomach in my throat. I couldn't move. I pissed myself, just straight up urinated in my pants for the first time since I was a baby. Tears started rolling out of my eyes down my cheeks. My hands and feet went numb. I didn't notice the dog move, but Reggie was suddenly right at my feet, with a strap from my backpack in its mouth, pulling on it as hard as he could, as though we were playing tug-of-war, yanking me back the way I had come. But I couldn't move. I couldn't raise my shotgun. couldn't look away from the ram. I was stuck. Then, the ram started weeping. That's the only way I can describe it. Fucking weeping. It didn't move its body, only its head. But it was whimpering and weeping, like a fucking person. Its facial features became very human. Its eyes bulged. Its bottom lip was quivering. It was whimpering out noises like it was trying to speak between sobs, while sucking in air like a crying child would. Then, unmistakably, it started speaking, or more like it started pleading. Don't go. Don't go.
Don't go.
It was increasing gradually, from a whimpering pleading to a desperate screaming. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was gonna throw up, or had already thrown up. After what felt like about 15 seconds, my dog finally yanked on my pack hard enough to get me to stumble, and I lost my footing. I couldn't move my leg to replace my foot, so I went down to one knee, then buckled ahead down the slope, rolling onto a shoulder, and finally breaking my eye contact with the ram. The second I broke eye contact with that thing, I could breathe again, and the sensation of falling went away. Reggie was whining and barking now, right in my face, licking my cheek, yanking me away from where I had fallen. I pushed myself on my palms and just screamed, "Go!" to the dog and grabbed my shotgun and half sprinted, half crawled up the hill out of the gully as fast as I could. The screams of the ram were getting louder. It started to hurt my ears. Reggie was ahead of me, stopping every 20 feet or so to look at me and bark towards the noise. I could see the dog was shaking like a leaf. The screaming started to turn into a single, unbroken roar that sounded half beast and half wind. The pressure in my head was so bad that a throbbing reddish blackness flooded my vision, and I could barely see. I just kept crawling and scrambling towards my dog's barking, and eventually crossed the crest of the slope at the top of the gully and was on flat ground again atop the valley ridge. Right then, the roaring stopped. The wind died down, and I felt the pressure in my head give way. The darkness faded from my vision, and the light of the day filled the world again. I stood up and jogged a short distance, until a thirst like I had never felt came over me. I collapsed at the base of a rock, and called Reggie over. I took like 25 gulps of water out of my camelback. I realized I had thrown up all over myself at some point while scrambling out of the gully, or maybe before, and had a few deep cuts in my palms and knuckles. Reggie was still shaking like he had just come out of an ice bath, and whining as though he was hurt. I checked him for injuries, but he seemed alright, so I gave him some water and put an arm around him, trying to calm him down a bit. I wiped as much of the dirt and snow-caked vomit off my coat, while keeping an eye and a shotgun barrel trained on the crest of the gully, expecting with a deep dread to see ram horns slowly coming over the crest. But they didn't. After a minute or so, I got my shit together. I took another sip of water, stood up and booked it the entire 3 miles or so back to the truck, jogging the entire way. As soon as I could see my truck, I fumbled my keys out of my coat pocket, unlocked it, and bolted straight for the driver's side door. I threw the dog into the passenger seat, the gun into the back seat, and piled in behind the wheel without even taking my pack off. I fired the engine up and tore down the dirt road much faster than it was safe. I got to the highway and didn't stop until we were in my driveway. It's been 2 weeks since that day, and I still haven't been able to sleep a full night or talk to anyone about it. The hell would I tell people without them thinking I lost my mind? Reggie has never liked sleeping in my bed before, but he's been curled up as close as he can to me every night since then. I have no way to explain what happened out there. I have no clue what it was controlling or possessing that animal. But I know one thing. It felt like there was a person inside that ram. It felt like a person's spirit was stuck in there and desperately wanted out. However, based on the way my dog was acting, I got the feeling that if I did end up helping it, I wouldn't have ever left that gully. I am sincerely terrified, in a way I have never known possible. Most days the walls are empty, bare, that shade of black that I hated so much, that I told her made it look like our bedroom was a witch's coven, which in turn only made her love it even more. She said she always wanted to be a witch, ever since she was a little girl. And then she pressed herself against me and asked me if I had any issue with witches, especially ones who could do this. And then it didn't take me long to shut up and forget all about it. But some days, if I'm lying very still and holding the stone in my hands, the walls open. I'm not sure how to explain it. It's as if the paint gets darker and darker, and somehow thicker, more tangible, as if it expands in all directions, getting deeper and wider, and slowly it yawns out in front of me, going back and back until I see them. I think there are poplar trees, thin, and with white trunks, reaching up into this new darkness with empty branches. Once I see the poplars, I know it's time to get up. That's when the wall is, I suppose, no longer a wall, but something else. And when I step off my bed, the floor is not wood. The first few times it happened, I didn't go very far. I would maybe walk a few minutes before turning around. I would explore in one direction or the other. This strange and secret wood that appeared in the walls of my home, it seemed, for the most part, to stay the same. It felt vacant somehow, as if something was missing here that was present in the real world. But as I spent more time there, that feeling grew less and less. I don't think I had much in the real world, not anymore at least. Not after Mary got sick, and her skin shrunk around her bones and the hollows of her cheeks. Both of her wrists were turned to pale twigs. Her breathing grew rasping, pain, not even after we were told that she didn't have much longer, that despite their best efforts there was nothing they could do, and that we maybe had a month, just a single month to squeeze in what was meant to be a lifetime. I could only tell her I loved her so many times, only spend so long holding her as she lost weight, try to pretend I didn't care, trying to pretend I didn't know she cried in secret, and try not to admit how scared she was. Once, she confessed to me, after a sleepless night, that she had spent vomiting into a plastic bowl, in a voice small and scared that she didn't want to die, that she was so scared sometimes she couldn't breathe and she thought she'll do anything to make it stop. The worst part was I couldn't do anything. I didn't know what to say to that, or what would help. The truth was unavoidable, real. I didn't know her family well, and at the funeral they seemed to avoid my eye contact. She had always said they were strange, had never wanted me to meet them, had said that there were things buried there that she did not want to uncover. They wore funny clothes, they smelled like strange herbs, and they spoke in whispers at the service. It hurt even more, the thought that there was this whole part of her life I knew nothing about, and that I would know nothing about. And then it would hit me, how much we still had to do, how much more of her there was to love that I never found time to. And I would close my eyes until the feeling went away. The funeral had been in the morning, and I sat by her grave until it grew dark. I read parts of her favorite books out loud, parts of Frankenstein, Rosemary's Baby, that she had underlined several times, pages that she had folded the corners of and left, in her handwriting, tiny exclamation marks and love hearts, pages that she had marked with little drawings, all packed into the little margins. I loved her for that, always filling the spaces that should have been empty. Her grandmother had stayed for a while, her eyes entirely white, blind, I assume, and without saying a single word. I don't know if she knew I was there, or if she thought she was alone, but we stood for an hour at least together. There was something about her I couldn't place.
She moved as if she didn't quite belong in this world, as if reality. Then she bowed her head, said something in a language that I didn't understand, and she left by the tombstone, a black pebble. We hadn't moved in yet. Most of our stuff was still scattered across the country, some at my parents', some in our old flats, some at various friends. Our house was bare, except for the bed and the basic appliances. I had, at the time that she died, nothing of hers but the books in my bag, the clothes in her closet, and a hole in my stomach that I thought would never go away. And so I took the stone. I know, I shouldn't have, but it felt like an artifact of her life. Somehow it felt as if by taking it I could hold on to her for a little longer, that I could have something that was hers, was meant to be hers, and that maybe she wouldn't slip away so fast. I almost fell, as if she might come back for it. I had this image in my head that she would walk up the stairs one morning, flushed from a run or with breakfast, and she would say that was her stone, and that she would stay a while, perhaps the whole day, that it would give her an excuse to come back from wherever she was, and just be with me, until she had to go back. I started spending more and more time in the forest. Sometimes I would go for hours, just wandering around the trees, listening to the faint sound of a brook somewhere. Closing my eyes and focusing on feeling nothing, I discovered a small hill. If you climbed for long enough, there was a spot where the trees thinned, and you could see the forest around you. Endless white needles from the black soil, stretching on in every direction. I saw the brook. I had only heard it up until that point, following the trail it cut. That is where I saw her, washing her hands in the brook, humming something slow and sad to herself. At first, I thought I might have gone mad, thinking that delusion finally caught up to me, finally dragged me under. But no, I was sure that was her. I was sure my mind couldn't recreate all of her, the way she bit her lip as she thought, the way she hummed with her mouth slightly open, so it sounded a little bit like singing, the small perfections I recognized, but could not name. I had no other choice. I ran towards her. I shouted her name over and over, Mary, and she looked up, and suddenly seemed so terrified, and she shouted that I couldn't be here, that I must not be here, that this place wasn't meant for me. I tried to shout back, but the noise had been caught in my throat, and the air ate my words, and I was mute, and I felt my legs grow denser and heavier, and the closer I got, the more I could see how scared she looked. I was convinced that she needed saving, and as I grew close, I felt the world around me shimmer. I stumbled and found myself in bed. I had been so close. From then on, it was an obsession, finding her. I would spend days in the woods looking for any signs, climbing hills, mapping the whole forest in my mind, following the stream until it led to a lake. Still, nothing. Just a vast black landscape, dotted with white trees. If I turned before entering the forest, I would be able to see my body, still lying in bed, facing the ceiling, and it was the same when I returned. Sometimes I would come back to find my parents, or friends surrounding me, eyes wide open, and they'll be talking to me softly, telling me it was okay, that I was okay. And I would have a moment before I climbed back into my skin and bones that suddenly felt so heavy to watch as they touched my hair and held my hand, and I did nothing but stare into space. As I went deeper into the forest, it began to change. The trees got thicker, taller. I also began to get the feeling that I wasn't alone. Not just that Mary was here, somewhere, but that something else was. I could sometimes smell it, musk, sharp, among the cool dirt. It was something heavy that bruised the bark of the trees as it passed. It could smell me, the heat and the scent that I would leave behind. I knew that much, and I would often retrace my steps, heart pounding, as I made my way back to the bed, to find that it had torn the trees behind me, uprooted them, and stripped them of bark. I imagined what it would do if it found me. what it would do if it found something that wasn't made from cold wood, but that was made of flesh and bone and warm. The longer I spent there, the most present it grew. I would see huge antlers through the gaps in the trees, a humanoid figure making its way to the base of the hill I was climbing. I would hear low moans from somewhere behind me. I figured it didn't want me there. It was out to find me, or worse, marry before I could even find her. If I hadn't wanted so desperately to see her, I might not have returned, but it became a compulsion. If the walls wouldn't change, I would just wait. I would move my thumb over the surface of the stone in long, slow circles, keeping completely still, as if moving would somehow break the spell the stone was casting. But this beast got smarter, faster. I know it was waiting for me when I came, and sometimes I would have to double back on myself, waiting for the sound of it crashing through the trees to fade, or for its low and mournful groans to fade completely. Sometimes I felt there was more than one. I would hear the groans echo, bursting from the trees in the distance at various points, a whole pack making that strange sound, searching, maybe for each other. In my worst moments, I thought they were maybe communicating about me, that they were somehow all grouping together to find my position, that one would come crashing through the trees, all rotting skin and bone, and it would pin me down and try to burst me open like a fruit. And when these thoughts came, I would have to steady myself against the trees and remember to breathe. But I kept going. I next found her by the shores of the lake. She was washing her hair slowly. I watched her for a while before saying something, watching the way she pursed her lips slightly as she concentrated, the way her back was arching when she would lean back. I moved out from behind the tree and asked her what I've been thinking this whole time. Asked her what she was doing here. She said she was waiting, that she was waiting here for me, but that I shouldn't be here. Not yet. That I have so much more to do. She kept going, telling me that I was wasting it all by being here, that this was a sad and lonely place and I shouldn't have come, that I should have never came. She said if I stayed here too long, I would forget why I came. My memories would leak from my mind like gas. I would forget there was anything outside the forest, that I would forget that the world wasn't just endless black soil and black water, and that she would hear me, not saying her name but moaning into the night, and, as if on cue, there was the noise of a beast in the distance, and I realized what a lonely sound it was, how confused and sad and searching it was. She said she would wait here for as long as it took, but that I shouldn't return until I had to, until I had no other choice. She said that she loved me, said that she knew I loved her, but that there were others who needed loving too. And as she spoke, the forest grew thin around me, as if it had the texture of smoke, and behind it, I could see my parents. And my friends sat around my bed, talking in whispers, holding my hand, stroking my hair, watching over my body, as it was staring with eyes wide open at the ceiling and did not move. I told her I was scared, that I didn't want to go, that if I become a beast, at least I would be with her, and she shook her head. I tried to say something, one last thing, but I couldn't think of anything fitting, of anything that could sum up everything that I wanted to so much to say. As I opened my mouth, it wasn't in the forest, but in my bed. And then I sat up, sobbing, so much that I couldn't even speak, and I could feel arms around me, and I could hear their words. And even though I couldn't turn off whatever had just sprung open inside of me, I knew, at least, that I was loved. I stayed like that for a few hours, sobbing so much that I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't think of anything, until slowly I settled. I took the stone back the next day, placing it where it had been left all that time ago. I could have sworn, though, that when I went to leave, in the space between the trees on the edge of the graveyard, for a quick second, I saw the figure of her grandmother, those white eyes fixed on me as if she was watching. I renovated the house since then. I painted over the black walls of the bedroom. I take it day by day. Sometimes I find myself wishing I had the stone, and I'll catch myself lying in bed for hours, seeing if I can will myself back into that place. But for the most part, I have put it behind me. I'll see her again when the time comes, and until then, I have to keep myself busy. I imagine the low, sad moan I heard so often in that place, and I know that I have to find my reasons not to join them. That each day, I have to find reasons not to join a beast between the trees. The small room that was going to be the nursery, I have now filled with her books. I painted it black, which I felt she would have wanted. From time to time, I'll come into it, pick a book at random and flick through, less to read the book itself and more just to see her handwriting, her tiny drawings, and thoughts that are packed into the margins. Sometimes, if I had a rough day, or have only barely made it out of bed, I'll find something new in the margins, the ink still new, a little note, or heart, or thought, and I'll know that she's not gone, really. And if I close my eyes and concentrate, I'll be able to hear it faintly, the song that she was singing by the lake, and I'll know that she's singing for me.